What up, everyone? This is Mr. Lord Dark Professor Dark Joker with this week's video. And this week, this is going to be another Star Wars video, and I'm going to go over my theory regarding the lore and history of the Celestials, the ancient civilization in Star Wars. First off, let's go over some of the known facts regarding them. Before the Rakatans, became, the Infinite Empire, had their big civilization. The Celestials were the most dominant civilization during that portion before it during the pre-Republic era. Now you had the Gree Empire and the Claw, in that time period, but the Celestials were the most dominant one. They built various, feats of engineering, various, space things, like Centerpoint Station, Sinkhole Station, which were meant to trap, Abeloth and the Maw. Yeah, that entire space storm and near Kessel, that's artificial. Yes, possibly create the barrier that separated the main galaxy that we see in Star Wars from the rest of the universe. Possibly, it's not confirmed, and possibly create some of the space anomalies that make the unknown regions as dangerous as they are. Anyway, yeah, they're very intelligent. And what little is known about them is that, by the time we get to 30,000 BBY, they disappeared. For whatever reason, we don't know. The Rakans probably were involved, but we will know exactly what happened. Here are some of the known Celestials. So, of course, we had, the Morris gods or the ones, the father, son, and daughter, who built Sinkhole Station, Centerpoint Station with the help of the Killiks. They were known as the Architects. And, Disney introduced at least one other one, with Morai, that owl that's associated with the daughter, possibly created by the daughter. Yeah. And then, Bendu, who was introduced in Star Wars Rebels, I do not believe has been confirmed to be one, but given his abilities, given what's known about how he appeared, as like a cloud where in Rebels during the Battle of Avalon, and some of his abilities, how he presents himself. There's a good chance he is a Celestial that was just in hiding, like basically didn't want to get involved with stuff. It's possible he was a Celestial as well. Yeah. Now I'm going to get into my theory in regards to the origins of Celestials. So if you remember from my Balance of the Force theory, I mentioned, a War of the Wills where a group of evil wills was exiled from the cosmic force, basically ended up in the mortal world. Basically, the whole war that caused the force to become unbalanced. So this theory is assuming that that theory is true, that there was a war of the wills that caused the force to go out of balance. So, anyway, so what I think happened is that the will exiles conceived children with mortals, and that led to the creation of celestials, like your first generation. So celestials, where it's like, half and half, where you have kind of like how the first generation was, you have a will and a mortal conceiving a child, you get 50-50, or you have, a 50-50 one, the first generation having a kid with a will or with a mortal. You have your 75%, 25%, either mortal or you have your 75% mortal, 75% will. However, basically, Celestials are mixed descent from both wills and from mortals. So they basically would be similar to the Nephilim from the Bible, where you had the fallen angels or demons that had children with humans, and that led to the creation of the Nephilim, in the Bible. and where there's theories that a lot of the gods, a lot of religions in the world are inspired by Nephilim and all that. So it's possible within the Star Wars universe that some of the religions in Star Wars, some of the deities involved with those religions could be inspired by Celestials. So that basically, given all the vast feats that Celestials did, it's not far-fetched that, given the stuff we've seen them do, that it would not be far-fetched to see them be worshipped as deities by a lot of mortals within Star Wars. So, stands reason. Let's say the Yu Vong, like their god, you know, which that's a whole rabbit hole, their religion. Let's say they're like let's say that was a celestial. And yeah, and this would also explain why celestials, why they seem to impact the force so much. Like we've seen like the Morris gods, how that whole arc, how it seemed the whole force was impacted by by them. And of course all stuff with Abeloth and Fate of the Jedi, and how important Abeloth was. Of course that part of that was due to her, like, I mean, she was a mortal who bathed in the font of power, found knowledge. That's a whole bit. But she basically became somewhat of a celestial-esque being. I don't know if you could technically call her a celestial, but anyway. But so yeah, basically, I think the Celestials are like the Star Wars equivalent to the Nephilim. Which, if that's lore that could be developed, there'd be some cool lore you could develop with that. That would get really into like the whole like the fancy stuff. Yeah, and a lot of sci-fi, but a lot of the fancy stuff that really separates Star Wars from other sci-fi franchises. And that's really it. Do you think this theory about the Celestials has merit? Do you have another theory as far as what their origins are, why they're so important to the Force? Do you think that the Celestials are just another name for the Will? Something like that. And if so, were they able to be killed by like the Morris dagger and all that? With a mortal potentially using it, that would be some questions there. But, whether you agree with my theory, whether you disagree, we have alternate theories, where, you can put all that stuff in the comments, and feel free to like, share, subscribe, all that stuff, and look forward to the next video.